was looking at somebody who could help me take out the unique parts of my application and help me project it as a strength. And that's where I think I felt most comfortable with Arun in the whole process. And I think that was just the decision making part in my mind that I decided to go with Arun. Once I felt that he was more interested in my story and how can we best project it rather than fitting it into a predefined story which a typical MBA school looks at it, and how can we fit my story into that, I think that was the differentiated part. And for me, it became essentially critical because the GMAT was not very high. So application really had to stand out on its own. I have done my engineering from IIT Bombay. I graduated in 2014 and I studied energy engineering. I've always been passionate about doing something for the climate change problem and wanted to create my own venture to solve this problem. Right after college, I first decided to go into the corporate part where I wanted to upskill myself and develop my financial base. So I started working with JP Morgan Chase in their risk analytics division. And after about a year there, I moved to Boston Consulting Group, where I have worked with a large conglomerate client on a whole transformation. So that was very essential in my overall personal development as I witnessed various functions starting from manufacturing to supply chain, uh, product optimization, sales strategy, advertising strategy, and everything. And I think that gave me quite a lot of confidence to start my own venture in the energy efficiency space in 2017. It's been around 4.5 years now since I started working on this. We are present in India and Poland and are backed by Schneider Electric. We have a hardware come software solution where we assist commercial businesses to reduce their electricity consumption.
Wow. Wow. So more from a perspective, as an entrepreneur, 4.5 years is you're almost you're at a growth stage is what I understand, right? So what was the thought process at this point that you felt that it was the right time for you to think for an MBA? Why did you feel that? Because I think your company is also growing right now. You have all the right things, and also at a point where it's it's at a growth stage, right? So what was the thought process, and why did you feel that MBA is important?
Correct. So I think the thought process that I went into this was that I probably felt that I needed to upskill myself, and more importantly, I wanted a better access to a matured market. In the last 4.5 years, what we realized was that India is still not at a cusp where we can say it is looking at a hockey stick growth in terms of sustainability or clean tech market. There are much more pressing concerns like better quality of education, quality of life, etc., etc. And the whole government initiatives, money, uh, private markets, everything is focused towards that. And given the electricity cost is very subsidized here, all these issues towards the climate change, electricity optimization, I think it's still going to take maybe a few decades here where it comes into prominence in India. But US and UK are much better markets in that regard. There is a lot happening there. And after working for 4.5, 5 years, I realized was that if I'm putting similar effort in a matured market, I think I'll be able to create much better impact. So that's the major reason I decided to take a step back from my entrepreneurial journey, look for an MBA, and post MBA, my plan is to continue in the same space, but maybe in the US market, maybe with an early stage startup in the similar field, or maybe with an impact consulting or impact investing firm where I can help nurture the overall space.
Right. So especially for someone who's like, part of the founding team for this particular company, how easy or difficult was this decision for you?
Extremely difficult. Means it the company was my own child. I started it along with my own founder. It has been with me for a long time, and although I knew that, I think after the second wave of COVID, that's when I actually decided that I wanted to do it. But still getting into that mindset where I actually have to start applying and thinking of MBA as a realistic possibilities, it took a few months for me to condition myself. It was that difficult.
I'm sure. I'm sure. So with all this, work and especially going on with your own venture, how did you plan your GMAT prep?
That was tricky. I think I was quite good at the quant part, so that helped a bit. I was able to finish that part in uh, very quickly alongside work. For the verbal part, I had to spend a little bit of time, and what I did was that I took a couple of weeks off where I focused entirely on the GMAT part to just bring myself up to a certain level. And
Mm.
then I think what I did focus was try to take a lot of tests and just improve my test taking strategies. And
Right.
overall, I think within a couple of months, I was there where I was able to get a score which was, I think, good enough to start trying to target maybe the M7 part. I was not sure whether I would get through or not. Even in the second round, I was still skeptical that if I don't get through, I would probably first focus on improving my GMAT further, and then maybe next year I would apply again. But thankfully, I got in with the current score itself.
Right, right. So, I missed asking this to Yashika, and I think it is, I can ask this to you. So, since both of you were preparing together and both of you are, looking at doing an MBA together, was that a conscious choice that you want to do it together? Or because I have seen couples applying for MBA in the past, and mostly
Correct.
one of them does an MBA first, and then, once the one of them is in the first year, then the second one joins,
Mhm.
like giving them a 1 year gap just to plan. So what was your thought process, and how did you guys plan this whole thing
Mhm.
that you wanted to do it together?
Right. So actually, it was always our conscious choice that we wanted to be together. Hence, doing it in a staggered manner was not really an option. We did not want to be away. And we recently got married last year, still in our first year of marriage. So that was also an important part that right after marriage, definitely we don't want to do this where one of us has to go away and the other person joins after a year. So when we started thinking about MBA, it was not just an individual decision, so it was conscious call from both of us that at what stage should it be right for us. And I think that also took us a couple of months where she had to figure out her career plan, how does she transition. I had to manage it with my own startup expectations. How do I transition? And then there was a added challenge that where do we apply? Given thankfully we had similar profiles, good GMAT scores, so we could apply to similar kind of schools. If that had been an issue, then it would have been a very difficult decision. But with that thing, we were always conscious that we at least wanted to be close by. So we shortlisted schools which were at least in the similar cities. So we went with maybe like Kellogg and Ross, which are 2-3 hours away. We applied with Duck and Wharton, and maybe the others backup schools were in the California part.
True.
We were also exploring UK schools because of they have a lot more 1 year programs, and because both of us were doing financials was also a very big aspect.
Mm.
We would have a double loan, so we wanted to get back to working as soon as possible. So, but UK then becomes a little trickier in terms of work visa part. So we thought US would give us the best choice in that regard. So we'll have a 3 years work visa, and the loan part will not be that big of a challenge there.
True, 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 true.
Even my GMAT just before round one, I got a 710 in my
Mm.
first attempt. I was not very happy with it, so I took a second attempt, which was very closer to deadline. But again, I got 710 only. I just took it within the next 2 or maybe 3 weeks gap. What was the minimum time? I immediately came back from GMAT and just filled it again. I will just give it another shot. But when it happened, that what I realized was that I did not have enough time to do a very good job on my application. Hence, I decided to
Mm.
skip round one altogether. I had started preparing for it, and I think I had written down a couple of applications, but I eventually did not end up submitting. And I think that was a very good decision. I had focused on Berkeley itself, but when I again worked later in round two, I think the difference in application which I had written in round one versus what was in round two, it was miles different. And I think that's what made the difference in getting me the interview call.
Right, right. So you worked very closely with Arun for your entire application process, right? Tell me a little bit about, the whole application process, and more from a perspective as an applicant and as an aspirant, that most average GMAT scores across schools are much higher, especially the top schools. The average
Correct,
GMAT scores
correct.
are quite higher. So how did you manage that? So first of all, between both you and Arun, how did you convince each other that this score is good enough to apply? That is number one. Number two, since we were applying to really top Ivy League schools, how did you go about that entire process? And how did you feel it was so different for you?
Correct. So my case, I would say that it was slightly slightly different from a typical MBA student, because I had a very differentiated profile. I had corporate experience, then consulting, then startup. Startup also into a very different field, which you don't find a lot of applicants for. You would typically find people in the software space. I had hardcore hardware experience in my startup. So that was very different. So when I was speaking with a lot of people, what clicked with Arun was that I was looking at somebody who could help me take out the unique parts of my application and help me project it as a strength. And that's where I think I felt most comfortable with Arun in the whole process. And I think that was just the decision making part in my mind that I decided to go with Arun. Once I felt that he was more interested in my story and how can we best project it, rather than fitting it into a predefined story which a typical MBA school looks at it, and how can we fit my story into that, I think that was the differentiated part. And for me it became essentially critical because the GMAT was not very high, so application really had to stand out on its own.
True. So
So
more from the whole writing process, how difficult or easy was it for you?
I would say it was challenging, and I think the challenging part was the time. I spoke with Arun and finalized everything, I think, sometime in November, early November.
Mhm.
So with the first deadline, we just had 2 months. First month, and in between all that, I also got married in third week of November. So I was again away because of that. So we had a lot of time constraint, and it made it a lot trickier. But I think what helped was that Arun was very calm during the whole process. We did not hurry up the first application. We spent, I think, 3 or 4 sessions with Arun and spread across maybe 2 to 3 week time, where we were just brainstorming on the motives, reasons for MBA, and how can we bring clarity to that, and how can the whole story gel up, which parts to which parts are already standing out. If there are some weak points, how can we counter those? What more examples can we think of from my professional or personal experience which can balance it out? And once that 2 3 week period was gone, I think first week of December, I think we started writing. Difficult because the first 15 days we took to finalize first draft of the application, but because of the groundwork that we had put into it, the draft that came out, I think, was in very good shape. And I think that Arun can also corroborate that once the first draft happened, it did not take us a lot of time to finalize it or convert it. And once we did that with the first application, the other applications were a lot easier. And during the writing process also, I think I also picked up how to write those applications. I learned those nuances. So first application again took some time on that, but the other applications were quite easier. And even I was able to highlight the stronger parts on my own, where Arun just helped on polishing the final.
A lot of especially Kellogg and these top schools, right? They focus a lot on giving back to the community kind of a thing. So did your profile have that aspect where, apart from having a great career progression, more from a community aspect? I think one of the schools also has one essay which completely focuses on how did you give back to the community, right? So
Correct.
did you have that kind of a thing in your profile, and how did you address that aspect?
I think for me, it was a little bit easier given the field I was already working with, because of my career was all about community or environment around. So I had dedicated the last 4.5 years making the whole environment around us better, helping more people adopt greener technologies, become more energy efficient. I That itself came out in the whole storyline. Or I would say that my whole narrative in my MBA story was just this, that I am a very dedicated person towards this cause, and MBA is part of that journey itself, where an MBA will help me just make an impact at a much higher scale. So I don't think I actually had to call it out separately. In fact, in most applications, what I had to do, the trickier part probably was that I was coming from a very different background. I had to continue in the sustainability field, which is difficult for international students even in US. So I had to handle that tricky part of convincing the adcoms or in the applications that the career path that I am going to be taking right after MBA, it is a safer part, and I am very clear about how am I able to approach it and get it confidently. So I think for me that was a little bit tricky.
Right, right, right. So, how many schools did you apply to in total?
5.
5. And how many interview calls did you get?
I got 3 interview calls
3 interview calls. So, how was the interview process? So, from Kellogg, from
from
Ross?
Voss and from Berkeley.
Wow. Okay. And how was the interview process for from each of these schools?
Interview process, I think, was very similar, I would say, or very different from what other interviews, job interviews I've given. Typically, in the job interviews, you will see that there is a stress element to it, or it can get a little bit difficult. So I was pleasantly surprised that at least during the MBA interviews, all the interviews were very welcoming. They made you very comfortable, and it was always just a normal conversation. What you're doing, why you're doing it, why MBA, how does it fit in your life? So that part was good, and I think I managed it well. Also, I was even in my mind when I was planning the whole MBA journey, I knew that if I get through the applications part, I knew the applications will be a little trickier. Interview part, generally, I've already felt a little bit confident that I'll be able to get through it. And I think the mock interviews also helped a lot. So I did mock interview with Arun, and then individual alumni also for each school. So
Right.
that also helped a lot, and that I think helped me just nuance my final examples. We all were already starting with a point, because I had already spoken to Arun. I knew how to pitch my answers, which parts to focus on. With the alumni, it just happened. Then what are the unique points about that school? How do I make myself more relatable or more fit to the school? So I think we are already working at a very high level while preparing for the interviews. So that was a good part, and I think we were able to do it very quickly.
Right. So, did any time, during your interview stage, you get a question saying that, you're an entrepreneur. How are you going to leave everything behind and do an MBA? Who's going to handle that on your behalf? Did this kind of a question come?
I think it came, and I think it was part of the Ross interview that went the longest.
Mhm.
He did ask, and I think I was very upfront about it. I had already spent 4.5, 5 years building the startup, and I was very clear that I am looking as an MBA as an outlet to a much matured market, where I would probably can continue in the similar fields with the similar idea or maybe something different. But it was more about getting myself access to that market, and I was able to, I think, justify it well to the interviews as well.
Right, right. So, right, amazing, amazing. So, I think all your hard work, all your efforts, came into with that admit of yours. And Yashika was telling how that whole thing happened, where the dean actually called you on a Zoom meeting and announced that all of you were part of that class. How was that feeling? Explain that to me.
uh, Very different, very different. So what really happened was that I got an email. I immediately called Yashika. She had also just received an email, or hadn't just. So I had already called her, told her that I received an email. She opened her inbox, and she had also gotten an email. I was very elated that now chalo we are through. But she was a little bit skeptical. No, 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 no. Let's hear from the dean first what this email is about, because there was no clear mention in the email that whether you are admitted or waitlist, or there is further interviews or further scrutiny, what is happening. So she was a little bit skeptical, but I think that call was just about an hour, so that 1 hour was a little bit anxious. And once that call happened, we're being called out and welcomed us all to the Kellogg part, I think it was a sense of relief, much relief that we were through, and more importantly, we were through to a program in a same school together, which was a very big part, very big point for us, that we always wanted something like that.
Right, right. Would you have done anything differently? in this whole process, GMAT to applications to, the whole process? Was there anything that you think you could have done differently?
I think it was just about the time management part, the whole decision making. Probably if I had come to a decision make earlier that I am pursuing the MBA within this session itself, and had taken a little bit more time for focusing on this, probably I could have also tried for HSW. With this GMAT score, what I thought was that there the chances are very thought, and I optimized for getting an admit offer and getting it together with Yashika as well. So that was the first priority. But if I probably had a little bit more time, I would have taken a couple of more moonshots like Harvard and Stanford and focused a lot on there as well.
Right, right. If
But
you have,
with the
I'm sure.
overall outcome, given whatever was happening on the personal side, the being an entrepreneur, running the business parallelly, and everything, the overall outcome, I'm very very happy. No complaints at all.
I'm sure. I'm sure. If you have to give any advice to, future aspirants who are aiming to apply to such Ivy League schools, what would your advice be for them?
I think my advice would be for the aspirants is that they have to be very clearly know in their mind why they want to pursue MBA. Their story has to make sense for themselves. Once they are clear, their actions are oriented towards that. Rest all piece is just about communicating that story to the adcom or the larger community.
Right.
The important part is how do you prepare or how do you make your in general life decisions? How does MBA fit in? All those decisions about yourselves are much more crucial than the application part. If you start focusing more on that, be more truthful to yourself in that journey, and if you feel you have done what you wanted to do, it's the easier part just telling others.
True.
One tactical advice also what I would like to give is that the journey is definitely very stressful and very time consuming, so proper planning is extremely important. So if you can plan your GMAT applications interview process properly and be diligent and disciplined throughout the whole process, it drastically improves your chances of success.
That's true. That's true. Cool. Thank you so much, Puneet. I think this was amazing. Really, really
It's my pleasure.
insightful, and I'm sure whoever's going to listen to this will find this extremely insightful too. And I'm so happy for both of you. I'm excited that you guys are going to have this new phase of life, and so excited, and all the best for
Thank
you
you,
for the
thanks a
next
lot,
phase.
and thanks for the support during the whole process. It was really amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you for choosing us for this part of the journey. We are so happy, and all the best. And we will keep in touch. I will look forward to see how what great things you are going to do in future. All right, Puneet. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye bye. Take care.